will pause at a couple different times during mine to take questions is what I'll do. Mm-hmm. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the workshop. We're just going to wait another minute or so for everybody to get in out of the lobby. So we'll be starting shortly. Mm-hmm. So we've got 17 now. Should we wait another minute or go ahead and get started? Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and get started, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. John Taborn, and I'm one of the career and pre-medical counselors here. Otherwise, we're also known as educational counselors, working with you as you're getting ready to consider reapplying to medical school. And as you notice from the topic today, you will also be joined a little later by my colleague, Dr. Erica Shirley, who's our well-being advisor. And I'll tell you a little bit more what she's going to talk to you about how to approach this process from a well-being standpoint and take care of yourself during it. So we'll have a number of people joining us during the time. But as we get started, let me do a little bit and talk about what the goals and objectives of our workshop are today. First of all, I'm going to start with a brief introduction to get your attention about repeating your application or reapplying and get you kind of engaged in that. And then I'm going to be walking us through kind of have you take out a pen and a paper or have some way to log so we can kind of walk you through how it is you might want to relook at your application as you prepare to do different things if you're deciding if you're going to reapply, what it is that you're going to be, how to refresh your application and developing your plan. And then the third thing we'll do at the end, or towards the end, it won't be the end of the workshop, in about an hour is my colleague Erica will come and talk about well-being for reapplicants, because that's really important for all of you that are here. So I'll be stopping periodically during the talk to take questions. If you do not hear me, you can try logging off and rejoining. Right now, your mics are muted. And so, like I mentioned, I'll pause and answer a few questions at the end of this, in the middle and the end of the segment to answer any questions. To ask a question, you can write it in the questions box. And a lot of people ask, you will get a copy of the presentation and of itself and the PowerPoint slides you will get afterwards after it's over. So with that, I want to also, before I get started, introduce members of our OITE educational advising team members who either you may have been working with or you will be working with going forward while you're here as a fellow and trainee at NIH. First of all, we have Dr. Natasha Hill. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, we have Natasha. Mm-hmm. And then we also have go ahead, Natasha, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Natasha Hill. Please call me Natasha. I'm one of the educational advisors here in the OIT, and I'm happy to help any of you that need assistance.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Dr. Siebold.
Hi, Dr. Gail Siebold, and I am a scientific skills coach and also an advisor as well.
Thank you, Dr. Siebold. And we have Dr. Hardy. If she wants to quickly introduce herself and say hi to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Apologies, I'm trying to do too many things at once. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany. I'm the director of the Educational Advising Program, and you're more than welcome to call me Brittany. Good to see all of you.
Yep. I'm noticing one person that you may end up working with as well as Dr. Moraima Nicodermos, who is also going to be joining our team this year, going through the process. And we want to welcome you to the workshop today as we're talking about reapplying. The first thing is I get started, and I love to do this workshop for a lot of reasons because I could start off with a round of applause. And so, because we're not in a large room, it might be a little bit of a bummer because we can't hear everybody applause. But I would encourage you to clap your hands, or you can snap in the air, whichever makes you feel good, and envision everybody in the workshop doing that for you. And the reason why is we want to applaud, I want to applaud and congratulate you and many of you on considering and approaching resubmitting and reapplying to your medical school and your applications. I know that's a big decision to make. It is filled with a lot of things, a lot of concerns, fears, and also some excitement, kind of mixed feelings. I also want to acknowledge that we have members here that may have applied in the past, if not this recent cycle, in the past cycle, but many of you that are here today might be currently considering reapplying, and you're in a waiting stage to find out if you're going to get in the next month or so. So a lot of, even as you're considering thinking about this, you're thinking ahead about how it is you might want to reapproach your application. And so, and anybody else that fits in that realm, even if you're new to applying to med school, or new to reapplying, that's all great. So we're hoping you'll get some perspectives and things to think about today. Also, we want to compliment you for completing the application last time. That takes, as you know, forever. Sometimes many of you even been thinking about this since you were a child, started when I look at personal statements. Also, you started acting on it when you were in high school, and then when you went to college, you started making it happen. And so we want to applaud that. It's a lifetime endeavor for many of you. Also, multitasking while you're here as being a fellow, navigating the interview process for those of you that have gone through interviews this year, and also even applying during this extraordinary time in history where there's a lot of things happening this year, and even last cycle that were happening simultaneously while you're applying, and you stood in there and you're doing it. And also managing your emotions and trying to stay strong and optimistic during the cycle. It's a long cycle, as you all have seen and are experiencing, and that's no small thing at all. We really want to congratulate you on that. And you've made it to this stage, and now we're going to talk to you about continuing forth with it, and even managing and staying strong. That's what Dr. Shirley will talk to us a little bit later, probably around 4 about this afternoon. So stay tuned. The first question you might be asking is, should I reapply to medical school? And I'm going to ask, if so, when, or should I be considering when I'm applying to medical still? And the first thing I would say to you is definitely consider it. And one thing this comes from is I used to work in admissions in the diversity inclusion realm of a medical school several years ago, as well as part of that role is I ran a reapplication program for applicants that were applying again. So I had for several years I ran that. And those applicants reapplied and they did very well. We had quite a high percentage in the 90s of people that reapplied and were successful. And here's a few things to know when I'm saying that to you. Medical schools view reapplicants, or they might call it repeat applicants, equally as first-time applicants. In fact, you have some benefit because you've already been through the process and you can already start updating your application, which we're talking about today. Also, to know that unsuccessful admission to the first or second time even does not mean that you're not capable of being accepted to medical school. And that's important to know. It's not like you have to do it the first time or that's over. I know there's more time involved, but stay with it if that's your plan. And we're going to talk to you about how to approach it. And you're really worth it. This is an investment in you and your time and your future, but your career. And some people think, is it really worth it? Well, I would have you put you on the front burner and say, yes, you are really worth this time, and you're worth the investment of, at least right now, as we're considering looking at how you might do this differently next time. And that's what I really think you should consider reapplying. In fact, here's a couple of statistics that can help. How many people reapply? Well, in this last cycle, there was a total of 54,000. By the way, you might see that this is the first time last year that there were over 100,000 applicants to med school last year. Of those 54,699 total applicants to med school programs, of those, 23,000 matriculated. So that's quite a few that did not get in. But this next statistic, for 41,000 were first-time applicants. So that leaves how many? An additional 12,869 applicants who applied who were repeat applicants. Each year, it's been about 25 to 30% of applicants every year that are reapplying to med school. And I just say that to you to have you consider if there's that many people applying again to medical school. And from what I know, we know, and trainees are getting in when they reapply, then that can be you, should you choose to do it. Now we want to learn on how to approach that process. So again, round of applause for all you're applying. You're actually going to be much wiser because you've been through the process already. And now we will talk a little bit more about that. So what are some of the reasons why applicants may not be successful in applying? And I'm going to say the first time. These are some of the comments from AAMC's research. Sometimes the timing of the application submission. And I might say there are many applicants that we see here at NIH that maybe have submitted their application on early in the cycle, like in June or July, but sometimes they don't get through the secondary part until later. So the application isn't complete until you, in the school's eyes, until you get those secondaries in. So think about your timing of your application and the whole different parts of it for submission. Sometimes the interviews may not have gone as you planned. Sometimes we want to show, it says low academic credential, science, GPA, and MCAT. We'll talk about that. Med schools love, and you'll hear me come back to this, upward trends. And you can show upward trends after you finish with your undergraduate degree. Doesn't all have to happen in undergrad. Weak exploration or understanding of medicine, and I would say explanation to the doctors who reviewed your application of your understanding of medicine. That's a little bit kind of related to that. Poorly written essays, we can work on that. Those are all improvable. And sometimes when you take a look at the school selections that you're choosing, you might want to choose and look at and expand or vary the types of schools and the programs that you're applying to. So those are some of the AAMC reasons. What we see here in OITE is similar, but I'm going to add a few things that we've talked about on our committee. Some of the trainees here will need to do some additional clinical care or working with patients. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we need some additional direct patient care. And sometimes that can mean that you want to have some experience where you're actually working with patients in a role similar to what a doctor does. Also, shadowing is going to be important. Several years ago during COVID, there was a lot of virtual shadowing. There's still a few people that do virtual, but I would say with the in-person shadowing, also explaining what you learned from each profession that you shadowed. MCAT scores we want to focus on. Do we need to show an upward trend? Science GPA, do we need to show an upward trend in your science GPA before you reapply to get closer to the mean? Interviewing, as we know, also looking at personal statements and how it is that you're making a persuasive argument to the physicians that you're applying to, that you not only want to be a doctor, but what you've done to prepare yourself and develop your confidence in going to med school is the plan, because the prompt was, why do you want to go to medical school? Sometimes you rush the application to stay on track, and that can mean a whole bunch of things. Usually what we see is that applicants might have hurried up and applied without having some of the experience needed, and during the year you might have gone about getting it. It is better to submit your application when you have everything up front with the applicants, something like that, or you just variety of things like that. With the AMCAS, we'll review that today. It might be you want to look and revisit how you filled it out, and are you making the way that you filled out the application, how you wrote it, and are the areas matching up between experience type and what you've written, and we'll go through. School choice, letters of recommendation, or they'll call them letters of evaluation, or transcripts may not have been received, or they might not be the right mix. Sometimes we see that. For DO applicants, it can be important to if you're applying to DO schools, consider shadowing a DO, and maybe having a letter from a DO can be helpful to make the case why you want osteopathic medicine. For MD PhDs, more and different or better discussion of your research. The MD PhD essay isn't convincing to the doctors why it is that you desire to have an MD and a PhD and how that's going to help you in your career. Or even why physician. Many applicants think they're answering the question, why physician, but it might come out sounding less like a physician or as we'll talk about some other kinds of professions. And so that'll be really important to have that clear. There's also a reality that sometimes it's a matter of chance or a matter of the school had so many applicants. This year we didn't make there's so many applicants you might not have might have been your time, or they kind of looked and went on to some additional applications. You might not have made the cut. That doesn't mean you can't do it next time. So there's for a variety of these reasons. There's some other things as well. Some additional factors that we know, there's been a lot of unpredictable events that have occurred even in your personal lives or even in our society and around us during the application cycle, especially in the last several years, even in the past 6 to 9 months, there's been a lot going on. Maybe you were not able to take advantage of pre-med advising in your undergraduate institution, or you may not have been able to utilize or weren't aware of what we offered here. And some instances, some of you may not have had advising on how to approach and apply to MD, PhD programs or other dual degree programs. And also not only application part, but working with advisors throughout the entire application process, talking about when and if to send updates and when you're sending them and how to write those. Those would be important. And then you might also, which comes up a lot with trainees here and around, you might have competing obligations and some a little bit of how you might manage your time differently. And that happens a lot. So the reason why I say these things is to give you some ideas about, these are not excuses, but realities that trainees and applicants across the country, but also here at NIH face. But one thing that I would have you think about when you're reapplying is, and I had a trainee give me some feedback on this, it stressed him out. It made his anxiety go up when he would think about even thinking about being a reapplicant or those words. And so I started thinking about, well, how could I present this differently? You can always say that you're refreshing your application. Medical schools, to AMCAS will call it repeat applicants. It doesn't mean reapplying does not equal that you have failed. It means you are reapproaching it and doing it again and refreshing your application. Similar to what we do as scientists, when you get a setback in your research, do you throw the whole thing? No, you go back and look at how can I retool this and get back at it again. So this is a little quote: winners don't do different things, they do things differently. In other words, stay on track. Maybe you can look at how you're applying a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that today. One thing that I have you start thinking about as we get talking, and Dr. Shirley will talk more about reframing your thoughts, is even as you're thinking about reapplying, is to reframe reapplying again in different words. One theme that I think is helpful is as a reframe. Reframe means to think about it differently. That opens you up to being more involved and motivated to keep going. A lot of people think of these as gap years. Oh, I don't want to take another gap year before I go to med school. I don't want to take and gap, if you think about it, sounds like a space, like in the buildings, like a space that you really can't fill. It's like you're constantly like there's like an open pit and you're constantly throwing dirt into it. When will I ever get it filled up? I like to have you think about it as bridge or bridge building years, where when you see the bridge on the other side of the slide, you can kind of envision what the other side is, and you're in the process of building your bridge to medical school. And for whatever happened in the past year, prior your past time, it might be we need to strengthen some of those pillars that we'll talk about in order to help you have more smooth sailing into medical school. And so with even that reframe or the rethinking it puts you more action and gets you kind of thinking about, well, I did this, what is it that I might want to do differently in strengthening my pillars to make my bridge to medical school much stronger. Okay. Some additional kind of reframes is, we mentioned the bridge building. A lot of people say it's going to take me another year. It really is going to be spending the next 9 to 10 months of during this time, if you're thinking of applying now or next time, is if a year feels like long, but if you think about in the next few months and you're already getting started with that now, this time next year, you'd be in the process of submitting your application. It's not really that far away, but it really can use with your plan and your strategy in building your bridge, you can make this much clearer. Another one is distance traveled. This is true for medical school admissions, doctors on the admissions committees, and this is some language they use. Distance traveled is highly valued by med school admissions. And what that means is that not everybody going to med school went to undergraduate out of high school and then graduated and decided they're going to med school. Some people may have started in the military or they started families. I just looked at a stat that there are applicants up to 60 years of age that applied and have matriculated into med school this year. Not everybody has to apply at this time. And it also takes some time. You might do a post-bac or you might be doing those things. Those are all preparing you for the success, even if you're in another career decided to apply. It's highly valued that distance travel and the different steps along the way makes a difference. Upward trends is mentioned. If you started with one stat or lesser experience in number of hours in something, you can always show an increase. That shows the medical school, the doctors on the committee, that you recognize that there's an area that's a little weaker and you've taken active steps to show an improvement towards the mean. That's a sign of a good medical student and future physician. You're not going to let a lesser strength be a lesser strength forever. And to that point, they look at it as a continuous pattern of professional and personal self-improvement that's demonstrated that will be recognized by the schools. And so all these things are things you can show when you are considering repeating your application, refreshing it, and demonstrating that to your medical schools as you're reapplying. So one of the questions some of the trainees asks is, while we're on this, I'm just going to pause for one quick second before we start going into what things to address. Are there any questions that we have so far that you want me to address? I know that Brittany and Natasha may be answering questions if you're asking questions online, but
we're good so far, John.
We're good. Okay. So as long as you're kind of on board with this thinking now, I'm going to say now let's kind of say that you're kind of you're in the chair and you're tuned into, well, what are some things that I might want to do differently if I'm going to refresh my application? And that's a question a lot of trainees come in with. And sometimes it comes out naturally is, if I reapply, do I have to resubmit my whole application? Or redo my whole application? Or I can't think of anything that I've done since last year that would make my application stronger. Well, what we're going to do is go through a few things to have you think about this. In reality, it is wise that you revisit your application. In AMCAS, if you applied last year, and in the other schools, they keep your application in the formats. You don't have to fill it all out. You just have to go through each section and update it, make updates, or say that you reviewed it and submit it. So you don't have to retype the whole thing in, but you may want to add some new things and restructure some things. So you have an opportunity to do that. And then here's some of the ways to start thinking about it. I'm going to have you take out, I'm going to have you take out a pen or paper, or have your notepad or on your phones or whatever, if you could, so you can jot down a few things by the end of the day that you might want to revisit and take a look at if you're considering reapplying. Okay. One thing is so we'll have a list, and at the end, we'll go back and have you revisit it. Okay, so let's start with, I'm sorry about this. I have to look at my time here to make sure that I'm on time. Okay. So one of the things that you want to do is, I'm going to have you think about a new perspective, or taking a perspective that maybe you haven't, that when I'm doing workshops with applicants or when I was recruiting students, I'd have you think about. The first question I have you think about is, who do you envision, if you don't know already, is reviewing your applications to med school? And a lot of applicants may not come up with this, but primarily it's going to be physicians who are faculty of the medical school. Many of them have MDs or MD PhDs, and they also teach in the hospital affiliated with that school, because not only they're teaching you didactically, but they're teaching you when you're doing clerkships and training. Many of them are medical students. For some of them will be involved, especially in interviews. They might be alumni, and they could be retired professionals that are giving back time. And sometimes there are other faculty that work directly with med students. All of them are listening to, does this applicant, and this is where it comes in, why does this applicant want to go to medical school is the prompt, and why do you want to be a physician? Okay. A lot of you might be thinking, why do I be a doctor, and answering the prompt. But as you're reviewing this, think about, how am I making this case to the physicians on this committee that I want to go to medical school? One thing is you have to clearly state that you want to be a physician. So even right now, if you think about how you wrote it, did you state physician, or did you kind of hint around the bush about that you want to be? And what that means is you want to be in that role of providing care to patients on their health. Diagnosis, treatment, that kind of thing. If you came at it from a different perspective, you want to make sure that's priority. Secondly, you want to link your interests and your background in the sciences to the role of physician and how that interests you. Third is, and they always say, the doctors will say that we want to know, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Or it doesn't kind of make sense. I reinterpret that as, they want to know, what has been your experience? Have you tried out the work of a doctor, of a physician, a doctor? And are you explaining to the physicians on the committee how that experience propels you towards being a doctor? Two ways that you're going to have to make this case in the eyes of the doctors reading this. One is, have you shadowed, meaning observed, a variety of specialties of physician, and wrote what you learned about that specialty? A lot of applicants have been writing what they saw, but that's not the same thing of what you learned. Saw means I watched them do this, but what you learned is a different process of taking in what you learned about what you saw. So it's going to the next step. Also, have you had experience providing care directly to patients in a way similar to what a physician might do? So that makes the case to the doctors from that standpoint. Also, medical doctors and MD PhDs, and in the future and now, you're training to be a leader in medicine. So if you want to talk about your experience as what you know about yourself as a leader, and how that also is something that's propelling you to and preparing you to be a leader as a physician, great. We want to talk about that. Service is community service, non-medical clinical, meaning generally doctors have a value and a commitment to community service, and so you want to have that shown in your application. Research is very important, especially for MD PhDs, of course, but research, biomedical research, your understanding of how research is important to and contributes to, and vice versa, the field of being medical care is important. All of you at NIH have really been working on that since you've been here, as well as MCAT and science GPA. I put it in this order because a lot of people have it in reverse, and they're thinking that the MCAT and the science GPA are the things that make the case to the doctors. But that's saying that I can handle the academic rigor of medical school and then face your test. You have to make the case that you've tried out this profession beyond any test scores. And so that's one profession to reframe, is to have you think about that as you're going through your application. So as you're doing this, I'm going to pop in and talk about a few more things. Step one, for those of you, and I'm going to say it like this because I know some of you are currently in the process of applying, and you might be on wait lists and you're waiting to be admitted. So this doesn't have to be right now. But for those of you that have applied in the past and your cycle is finished, see if you can get feedback on your current ACOMAS or your current AMCAS or Texas application materials. We want a variety of different perspectives. One would be if you can get feedback from a school that perhaps you were interviewed at, or that, you can reach out to any school and ask them, because you want to get on not only your written application, but if you interviewed, they might have some comments about your interview. Also, our OITE pre-med advising team or our educational advisors can give you feedback, or some from your undergrad or even mentors can give you feedback. You don't have to get a lot of it, but anything you can do and bring in and work with us as education advisors, we can use. I think that feedback from the admissions committees will really be helpful to you if you can get some. Okay. And then we can bring that in and we can talk to you about how we can incorporate that feedback into your application. Even if it seems something small, write it down and let's talk about it. Okay. Step 2 is we want to have you pull out your verified AMCAS. And for many of you, when I'm working with you haven't looked at your AMCAS since you submitted it, and there's one where it's verified, and that has the sections filled in with hash marks through it about the coursework, and it also there's a section that's filled in about your BCM AO, which means all other course, and your overall GPA, your MCAT scores and test scores. Those weren't in there when you submitted your application. So if you get a copy of that, I usually say go and print the PDF version so you can look at it very quickly. And you want to look at the verified AMCAS, look at all the information that's in that AMCAS, because then you'll get to see what was the actual science GPA, what was the MCAT scores, what were some of the things that you had in there. And then we'll want to start having you, and we'll walk through that today. What are some things you can do for reviewing these various sections of your application? Okay. And I'm going to kind of go on to that next. So I'm calling it step 3. So one thing I would have you do is to check the science GPA and decide, do you want to show an upward trend towards the mean? This is last year, the 2025 people that began 2026, the average MD had a 3.75. DO was 3.59 from 2024, their stats. And the average NPA is science GPA is 3.82, and they have a small standard deviation. Notice you don't have to have this score to get into the med school. As long as you are in a bell curve in and around that, you're in good standing. Okay, if you're kind of off towards one of the tails and you want to look at, especially if you're off towards the tail where it's 3.3 or 3.4, this is where you might want to take some additional courses and show an upward trend. Also, you'll need to retake any courses that are C- minus or below, which would be wise for you to do. And what you'll need for med school are upper division science courses. Sometimes people want to take grad courses because they think they're in their minds are thinking grad school will prepare you for med school, but med school is really upper div science course level, so that might help you. And also you'll want to update with any new transcripts, any new courses that you've taken since then when you're reapplying. And we'll talk a little bit more about post-bac programs, but some of them are academic enhancing post-bac programs where you can go and take some additional courses to show an upward trend should you need to take more than one course or two. Okay. The next thing is you want to on that page, look at the MCAT and decide, will it benefit me to show an upward trend and retake the MCAT? This past year, again, you don't have to have this, but the average admitted applicant to MD programs had a 512 MCAT, 504 for 504.7 and 516 for the MD PhD. There's usually in and around that for the past several years, not much for each one of the programs, with the standard deviation of 6.5, which means that, again, you don't have to have like a 512 to get in. Medical schools will accept you. And also, we're looking at the whole of your application, not only the scores, which I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago. But just something to look at and to think about, is this something that will benefit me to retake it so I'm showing an upward trend towards or above that score? And that's something we talk with applicants a lot about. If you do it, we recommend you have a plan and a study plan to address it. And sometimes it might feel like it's really hard to do that right now, so you can resubmit, by this June or July. June when you'd submit a new application. So that's something to think about, is timing of when you want to reapply along with everything else. So keep that in mind as we go through today. Okay. Here are some resources that the OITE offers for MCAT prep. This doesn't look like doesn't look like my change is saved. I apologize for that. So there's a different slide that will update you on that has the current. Oh, maybe this is it. No, I think it's not. There's two MCAT prep courses, and I think the changes I made didn't stay, but here are some resources that we have here. I apologize for that, but we will get those to you. It might be we can share those in those correct courses in the chat at some point. I apologize, I can't do it. I can't see those of you that are here. So, alrighty. I'm going to pause here in a few minutes. Let's pause there before I go into experiences, activities and experiences to see if we have any questions related to that.
So far, so good. Unless
So far,
anyone,
so good.
does anyone want to unmute themselves or, oh wait, can you, oh wait, you're not able to unmute yourselves yet. But we're good, John.
Okay, so good. And we have Brittany and Natasha that are Dr. Brittany and Natasha Hill that are there who can help address some of these questions. The next slide I'm going to talk about here is, so we talked about statistics, but also you want to, I'm talking your test taking scores and that kind of thing. Equally important, and in my opinion, equally as important, if not a little bit more, is how you are discussing your experiences with the doctors on those committees. So you'll want to take a look at how you wrote and what you put into your activities and experiences. And here are just a few bullet points to start looking at, and you can highlight or think in your head, and then I'm going to walk through a couple of examples. But for many of you, some of you had a question, do I need to have used all 15 experiences? You don't have to, of course, but if you do, that can be beneficial because it gives you more room. I'm going to click ahead here one slide because one reason why some applicants, if you were doing it on your own, you might not have had a chance to look at what are the different experience types that you could choose for your application. And so here is a whole list. I know one of the areas that sometimes I see is people put presentations and publications together, but really they're two different sections on the AMCAS, and that's where the doctors and those reviewing are actually looking for that data. So you'll want to make sure, or they put the honors and awards under a different section, and they didn't realize there's a separate section for honors and awards and scholarships. So these are some things for you to pay attention to as I go through the rest of the list. So you want to look at, if you want to use the 15 experiences, do you want to update or include additional clinical or shadowing experiences? In your shadowing, are you writing what you've learned? And your clinical experiences, meaning medical, clinical, are you writing what you did in terms of patient care? Of what you did relevant to working with patients rather than what a physician might have done. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, check for the correct categorization of your experience type. So I gave you that list. Some people may have described it as one heading, but they described it as leadership in the write-up and things. You want to make sure they agree. Otherwise, the reader doesn't have any way to determine, and they won't change it. That's up to you to do as an applicant. Make sure your experience types match. Try to be clear and concise and consistent with the experience type and what you did and what you learned. Under most meaningful, I'll give you a heads up about this. Many applicants under the most meaningful, you might have continued to write about what you did in that experience. But really most meaningful, I usually say, is an additional 1,350 characters to write about how you grew, changed, or developed, you as the applicant, as a function of this experience. So when you're looking at that, you want to see, are you writing that? Sometimes people will write 1 or 3 sentences and the rest is description of what they did. The reader, the doctors, are looking at, I'm using this section because I want to know why they're calling this most meaningful. All of them are meaningful, but why are you highlighting this and how did you grow, change, or develop? Or why is this important to you? And that's your place to really, it's like a shorter kind of personal statement focused on one experience, but you really get a chance to share. Also look at typos or even look for excluded information. Common is people will not put in city, state, or zip, or location, or if it says contact person, they might not put anything, especially if it's for themselves or they can't figure that part out. The people reading it will look at it as they didn't fill this in, it's not in a complete application. So these are some things to kind of focus on and make sure everything's filled in. And then we'll be I wonder if this is the right presentation. We'll be talking about doing a workshop coming up in June on, or next week on tips on filling out your AMCAS. Okay. These are, again, are the experience types to revisit. So you can take a look and think about, do you want to recategorize these or add any new ones? The next part is you do want to take a look at your personal statement for a variety of reasons. One thing is we recommend refreshing or rewriting your personal statement. It doesn't mean it have to be from top to bottom to scratch unless there really is some work or some things that you'd want to do differently. But if you applied to several schools and you're applying to them again, it's fairly recent memory that if you have an introduction at least that's kind of memorable, you may want to change that, because I know that committee members will say, this, I read this one before. Did this person do anything different with their application? So you want to know in your mind that you've refreshed and rewritten it. This can include updating it with new experiences you had or more recent. Might be that you haven't stated you want to be a physician and really state that in there. And we also, in our personal statement course, have a little different approach to your storytelling. It might be making a persuasive argument and telling the committee about what you learned in that experience that propelled you there, rather than kind of summarizing it. We can talk more about that as you review that. I know for DO schools, the prompt is, those of you who apply to osteopathic medicine, is, why do you want to be an osteopathic physician? And sometimes if that doesn't make the case in your personal statement, then you'll want to make that case by looking at ACOM and looking at what the history of DO schools are and your and why you fit with their values. You might also want to have an experience that you talk about from when you shadowed a doctor of osteopathy or what you learned about it, so that you can really make the case to the osteopathic doctors. The only way I'd want to be a physician, I want to be an osteopathic, and why. And then we want to, sometimes the personal history or background or inclusion of people or family members is a little bit longer, and we want to have it make more strongly about you, or more recent about your experiences since college. We know and we understand that many applicants have a strong personal connection to family background and culture, and that is you as you're applying. But it might be we want to have you do it a little bit differently to make that case, but also hear the you in your application, because you're applying to med school in the eyes of the doctors. So we can have you work on that. Okay, and we had some suggestions here for some of the courses you may want to take. Okay, here's a note for MD PhD essays that we take a look at. Sometimes the MD essays for MD PhD essays sound like you want to be a researcher. For example, why do you want to go to med school, or why do you want to be a physician? So I can use my medical knowledge to answer research questions, and the rest of the essay is about your research background. So what they're missing, the doctors are missing, why do you want to be a doctor and provide care to patients? And that happens a lot with MD, PhD applicants. So I think that's what's going to be for MD applicants. It might not, for the next bullet, it might not state you want to be a physician. It might sound like you want to be a public health advisor, or a public health professional, or an advocate for underserved populations. That happens a lot. For example, many of the doctors that I've worked with on these committees, they might say, sometimes they read the personal statement first before the rest of the app, and they're thinking about, does this application sound like the person wants to be a doctor? And that goes on to further evaluation and interview. I'm not sure, it sounds like a little different perspective, a different profession, or a mix. For example, it sounds more like a researcher. Are they clear they want to go to med school? Another one over here, a pile, is this doesn't sound like medical school at all. It sounds like a different profession. And then your application stops. So as you're looking for that, we want you over here in the med pile. Okay. For the MD PhD essays, as we mentioned, you need to explain why. I usually have you think about your future career goals after you're done with MD PhD, and why it's important for you to have an MD and a PhD, and how you see them coming together for you. Then you're making a case for how you need both of those in your future career. And research essays, it's important to look over those, because many applicants write about the technical details of your research, more importantly, is that you're able to explain to researchers that you have some autonomy and independence conducting your research. And the way to kind of explain that is for each research experience, explain the research question, the methods that you use, the results, and the application of your research, like how is this important to the field, and then discuss if you presented or published and what you learned. So that you're explaining to the doctors that you have some autonomy and know how to, and the MD PhDs, that you know how to conduct research, not just that you've conducted it. You want to explain that to them. Yeah, so those are some notes on the MD PhD. A note on letters of recommendation, and I know that AMCAS will call them letters of evaluation. This is your opportunity to revisit your letter choice that you've chosen and decide, do you want to change, update, or add new letters? So you want to revisit your letter choice. Add new might be, for some of you applied to NIH before you applied to med school before you came to NIH. Now is the time to use your NIH, PI letter, at this time or something like that as you're doing that. Also, make sure that you're looking at, for each school, you have the right letter mix. Meaning, some schools will want one letter from a science professor and maybe one from a non-science professor, and then someone that's a doctor or speaks to your research or things like that. Many applicants might not have focused on that and submitted all research letters. Or make sure the letter that you're writing talks about your strengths for medical school. And sometimes a letter might talk about your strengths for a graduate school or PhD program, but not recommending you for med. So you can double check that before you reapply. And also, if your school used a committee letter, this doesn't happen as much, but you can use the committee letter as well. Many of the schools will look for one if they know your school submits those. And for those of you applying to DO, do you have a letter of recommendation from a DO school? Here's a note on a couple of additional essays or other sections that you'll see in your application. One that came earlier in your application are other impactful experiences. In the past, they used to be called disadvantaged essays, but none of us in the application community, including doctors, like the word disadvantaged essays because there's opportunity in people's hardships. So instead, they're calling it impactful experiences. It could be anything from when you were a child up to even when you're in med school that you want to tell the committee, to be aware of, separate from your personal statement or whatever, that had an impact upon you. If anything, when we look at reworking those, you decide if you feel like you're someone that needs to add one, or if you want to revise and rework this section, it would be important to do. And that's one of the things that we want to do. For example, you want to write, I might have this in a later slide, but in this essay, you'll want to say what the impact on you is. You might have, something might have occurred, and what was the impact of you, and how was that a hardship for you as the applicant? And then also kind of saying what kind of strengths or what kind of things do you take away from that experience? Is a way to kind of approach that. And sometimes it's a couple of things. The other ones is if you have institutional actions. You want to make sure that you explain the action clearly that happened, discuss what you have done to address or I'm going to say rehabilitate from that situation or action. And then as a result, this is how I am now. Because this is your opportunity to explain clearly. This is about your integrity as an applicant. This shows that you're not willing to let a weakness or lesser strength or an institutional action or whatever affect you, and you've taken a role to really address that and understand that and make it a strength for you. And so there's a way to kind of rework those or include those. Step 8 is updating your med school list. We usually recommend applying to a minimum of 15. I usually see 15 to 25. There's some applicants apply to a lot more than that, even 35, 40. What happens in many of these situations, and this could have affected your application, is there's so many secondaries that you won't have time to get to all of them, and you end up filling out secondaries into October and November sometimes, which means your application isn't complete for that school until later on. So maybe as you're revisiting this, you're going to trim down your list and make it more focused. You can use the MSAR to look at that, at GPAs and MCAT scores, but also thinking about the types of schools where you'd like to apply. Some trainees here decide and thinking about, is it better for me to apply to MD, PhD, or MD? Because after a year of applying, they really start realizing they like research, or vice versa. So it still means you can update your med school list. One other thing that I'll say here is you'll want to revisit your secondaries and look at how you answer the questions for your secondaries to be sure you answer the question that was the prompt for the secondaries. For example, many did not answer, what will you bring to the school? They might say, what will you bring to our school? And they answer it as, this is what I did in the past. And they never answer, what will you bring to our medical school? That's the answer to the question. That's what I see a lot in secondaries. Or some people don't answer the question or wonder, is there anything else you wish to add? And I recommend, if there isn't anything else you wish to add, meaning on the secondaries, like anything that's not in your application or there's something new, it's okay to answer the question, I do not have anything to add at this time. Otherwise, if you leave it blank, unless it says leave it blank if you don't have anything, they'll assume you didn't answer the question. So again, attending the workshop on secondaries and additional assessments. Also, you'll need to revisit the CASPER and those secondary assessments again if you choose to and have to. Okay. And then the next thing I'll say here is reflect on your interview. So if you were one that was fortunate enough to have interviews, that's great because now you know what the interviews are like for medical school, and you can think about how you felt during the interview, get feedback from the schools about if there's anything about your interview, and you might be thinking about how you might approach answering questions that were uncomfortable for you or things like that. And we can work and practice with you on that as you are getting ready to reapply as well. So you're kind of reviewing everything in your application, not just the app. The next thing you'll want to think about here is which cycle is best to reapply. As you come up with your list and you look at it, you're going to have to kind of be honest with yourself and think, a lot of people want to jump right back in there and get on it right now. But to show an upward trend and show the strength that you need, sometimes it's better to take that extra few months now to show the upward trend that you want. It's less pressure on you right now. You can fit it into your time schedule to show the upward trend needed. And sometimes trainees come and talk to us about what is the best time. But even applying next cycle can make a lot of difference. Meaning, if you're not going to apply right away, giving yourself another 12 months to study for an MCAT and get some more clinical experience without trying to do it in 2 months can really increase your chances of being successful. And that's one of the things I worked with people about when I was working with in a reapplicant program. Someone would take a couple of cycles and then they went all the way through and had multiple interviews. Okay. We're almost done there. This is a note on deciding about if pre-med or pre-health post-bac programs can be helpful. If you haven't thought about them, there's a link on AMCAS for them, and they also have them for DO schools. There's generally several different types: grade enhancers, underrepresented in medicine programs that are focusing on making sure that you have the necessary fundamental courses and things that you want. Career changer. Grade enhancers might be you're taking courses show an upward trend, or retaking courses show the upward trend. Underrepresented medicine might have a lot of mentoring involved in case you didn't have the mentoring need along with some of these other things. Career changer might be you could have been in consulting and business and engineering and now you want to go to med school. You need to get in your mindset you want to be in there with people that are going that direction. It takes all types to be they encourage all types to apply to medical school. And there's a way for you to approach that too. There might be some of you that need to do some additional time in one of these programs if you are coming in with you need to take some additional classes if your education was not in the US or things like that. And that's something we want to talk about directly. In addition to our YouTube post-bac program presentation here, we're looking at having another post-bac program as part of or adjacent to our graduate and career professional symposium this summer. So reach out and stay tuned because we're going to have some other programs come in and talk to you about those. Those are really very valuable to trainees. There's a lot of details with it, but they can really be beneficial. And I ran one and I can tell you how it really give you some focus on those. So now this is an example of a timeline for you to use for applying for the, whoops, this should say 26-27 cycle. So you can start now and take a look at that. Notice that the AMCAS opens on May 5th. You can submit on May 28th. And June 26th is when AMCAS sends it out. You want to look at the timeline for Texas schools and DO schools. Texas, I think, is around May 1st and might start the 15th. But you want to look at those dates to make sure what you're applying to. Okay. So now that you've got there, you can review your list that you have today and study it. Maybe think about, as you're looking at the list, put some method to it. What are some things that you want to approve before you apply, how you're going to do it, and the date due. This will help you think about when it is and the timing when you want to submit your refreshed application. If you need to contact new people, if you want to meet with a pre-med advisor, those kind of things, you want to take those into consideration as you go through. Of course, we're one of the people you can use in your work with in your quest to reapply when you're ready. I would have you meet with one of us, one of the educational advisors. So it would be me, John Taborn, or Dr. Brittany Hardy, or Dr. Natasha Hill. And this is the way you can go about scheduling an appointment with one of us. And if you're reconsidering, some of you might be reconsidering, is med school right for me, or do I want to look at another path even before med school, or working, or other careers? I think it would be helpful for you to meet with one of our career counselors. I am also one of those, but that'd be a different group of people. Amanda Dumsch, Ann Kirch-Gessner, and Denise Saunders. We all work with you on your career, reevaluating your career paths. It can include med school again, but sometimes you want to reevaluate and ask questions on that. And you can find appointments with one of us on those, and we're happy to work with you. Also, this is for some of you who might be leaving NIH, or if some of you are joining us by chance, or you have colleagues that are not at NIH. NAHAP, which is the Association for Health Professions Advisors, also has some resources for you to find an advisor that will help you, low fee, if not any fee, to help you with your advisor if you're not at NIH. So I'm going to pause here. I know I went through a lot of things today and get ready for our talk from Dr. Erica Shirley. And I want to encourage you to stay for that, because a lot of this you're listening to today, we want to talk about your wellness. But are there any questions we have so far? Mm-hmm.
Hey, John. Yeah, we do have a question. So,
okay.
Someone asked, due to the character limits in the work and activity section,
yes,
I am finding it difficult to fully describe what I learned and gained from the physician shadowing experiences. Would I reserve this for the secondary application and the personal statement instead? I have already used my 3 most meaningful experiences. So they're talking about shadowing. They don't have enough characters to talk about what they learned. What should they do? Should they put it in their personal statement, secondaries, or keep it in the working activities?
Okay, so very good question. That's a question we get a lot. I think that would be something to meet with a pre-med advisor about, at least have someone. For me, I would like to take a look at what you've got. But to answer your question quickly, I recommend putting it's how you write that experience. It can be as little as, you have 700 characters, say, for one of those experiences. It can be the doctor's name, their specialty, and then a dash, I learned XY, I learned this. And then you can go to the number of hours, and I learned this, and putting them at the top. It might be that, but I would put them all in the AMCAS application. Don't wait for secondaries. The reason why is not all the schools will ask the same secondary questions, as you have seen. And I wouldn't put it in your you can put part of it in your personal statement, but I think I would try to get as much as you can in the actual AMCAS. And sometimes it means you need to open up another don't try to cram it all into one. If you have several shadowing experiences and you can get 5 of them into one experience space, and you might want to open up another. It's not like you have to cram everything into one. It might be 2. That's okay to do in an AMCAS because you're making that case to the doctor that, yeah, I've shadowed a lot of doctors and a lot of specialties, and this is what I've learned. So I hope that helps you. I try to get it into the primary application and make some room for it. And you don't have to write big, long sentences. This is what I learned. So you can kind of get it in there. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Okay.
We have another question. Would you say it's only worthwhile to retake the MCAT if you are below the national average? I think they mean the national average for all accepted applicants. How do I decide whether that's what my application is lacking?
Okay, so I think so to answer your question, I would have you kind of go back through the workshop when you get it again. What I didn't mention is usually I talk about, or I did kind of mention, I usually talk about it might be an MCAT, but there might be some additional things that you want to show an upward trend or increase. So that's why I think meeting with one of our pre-med advisor, an educational advisor, and looking through your application that you've submitted and see is there anything in addition to your MCAT that you'd want to retake or you want to update. And then that would be a way to determine if that's the only thing. If you're right on the national average or a little bit above or a little bit below, you're going to be pretty safe in there if you're in terms of if you would decide not to retake it. Some applicants, because your application is not only going to be based on your MCAT, it's based on the strength of everything else. If you're looking at some schools, like say you've got I'm making this a 511, and you're looking at some of the schools that you really want to go to, and their average at their school is a little bit higher, like say it's 518 or something, and you want to get closer to the mean, you see that might be an indication for you to say, well, it's not going to hurt me to show an upward trend. And if you feel like you've been studying and you want to take it again, that will help you go for that. You just want to decide you have enough time to study for it before this next cycle, or if you want to take some time with that. I think sometimes it's an individual conversation in the context of everything else that will help you come to that final decision. But there are people that are looking at a school and they say their school takes a 518. I need to have a 518 to get into that school. And that's not really what that statistic said. That says this last cycle of applicants, that average range was around 518. But if you're within that bell curve, you're good. If you're closer to the lower tail, you might want to retake it a little bit. Okay. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Thank you. One more question here.
Okay.
What are some opportunities at NIH to get more clinical experience while working as a postbac?
So that's a very good question. And we have a lot so one of the things to know why you're NIH is your primary, I'm going to say, role as a fellow is to do research in the lab. We know. And a lot of the research, because this is a postbac for research, that is what you'll be doing. You may have to look outside of NIH, and there are several places, even close by across the street at Walter Reed or at one of the hospitals nearby or close to where you live, to gain more clinical experience, whether it's shadowing or other, because it's really hard to get that while you're here doing research. So we have a list that we might want to be able to upload into the chat to you today, where some places where people have looked. And you might want to, if you have time, make an appointment or come to one of our Friday workshops on that, our Q&A sessions, in case you want to kind of identify some of the different places, depending on the types of clinical experience you want. One thing the trainees have been liking, and it is considered something like shadowing, is to do the undiagnosed disease program shadowing, where you're watching physicians of different specialties consulting or conversing with each other about a case that's come in, and many times you see the case there that's an undiagnosed disease that other places in the United States haven't been able to figure out what is the health problem here. And that's a role that physicians, you'll be called upon being a physician in the future, and that can be something really interesting to write. What you do as you're shadowing is to write down, these are the physicians types that that were consulting about this case, and I learned that about what it's like to do case consultation between physicians or something. That's a learning statement, and the number of hours you did. That is some things at NIH. Other times you might be doing, some of you might be doing some clinical research where you have patients as well. It's not really easy. It's not really easy or not recommended to change research so you can do clinical research, because they really want to see that you have experience outside of research and patient care. So they know what your patient, that you've worked with patients and or shadowed a variety of specialties. Hope that helps. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, John. I think we're all good on questions, unless anyone has more. I think we're all good, and we're at 4:06.
Okay. Oh, we are at 4:06. My clock, I probably went over a little bit. I was trying to be on time for Dr. Shirley. So, is she on the?
I believe she is.
Okay.
I'm here. Yep.
Oh, you are here. Good. I just want to make sure, Dr. Shirley, for one moment, that we have the right. I don't want to scroll through this. I want to make sure that we have the right. I'll know if I look at the end of this that we have the right presentation, because to me, I didn't save something.
Oh.
Like we got it. I think we got it. Okay. If not, we can always send the updated one to them. So I don't want to rip through all your slides. Okay, I'm going to introduce Dr. Erica Shirley to all of you, who is going to be presenting and talking to you about well-being and how this is very important, because I know it's a shock to the system and stress to think about, reapplying, but you're in a good space to be able to do this well. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about that today. And then I'll hang around, be here at the end of the session if you have any more questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Okay, and let's see. Do you need me to flip? Let's see, how could we do this?
Yes, I believe so.
Erica, you can take control.
Oh, okay.
There's a button on the top that says take control.
Oh boy.
Got it. Thank you. It says request, so I just requested control.
Yeah, and John, you got to give her.
I give you control.
Thank you. Got it.
So I'm excited to introduce my colleague here, one of your fellow well-being from our well-being advisors from OIT, who's going to talk with you all now. So enjoy, and I'll be here at the end. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks so much, John, for that wonderful advice on how to apply or how to reapply. And so given that Dr. Taborn was talking about lots of good insight into what you should do to reapply, this is just a way to think about how you are engaging in the process, given that the reapplication process, as John said, is likely loaded or associated with uncomfortable feelings, some burdensome thoughts. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and then think about how might you respond to it such that it doesn't get in your way or interfere with your plans and goals to reapply. So you may be familiar with this model. This is our OITE well-being model. It helps us to think about the well-being in a holistic way, thinking about how are we taking care of ourselves holistically, body, mind, heart, spirit. Another model that you've likely seen at OITE is the thoughts, emotions, behavior models, right? So you have this goal to reapply to medical school. You're getting a lot of information, collecting information on how to go about doing it. And it's also helpful to think about, well, how am I engaging in this process? What is coming up for me? What are my thoughts? What are the feelings associated with those thoughts or narratives about it? And then what does that usually prompt me to do? We do tell ourselves stories. So our narratives about an experience is very important to how we feel about it and how we go about engaging and responding. And so it's important to think about the idea that usually an activating event such as reapplying to medical school probably calls up a certain narrative, whether it be beliefs that you have about yourself as it relates to the reapplication process, feelings that you may have. And maybe Dr. Taborn at the beginning of the session may have mentioned the idea that, reapplying may hold some disappointment, may hold some anxiety, may hold some uncertainty and fears. So these might be some stories that you're telling yourself about this experience. And so thinking about how do I respond to those thoughts and feelings is important. So naming it is taming it, as kind of we say in psychology or mental health provision, right? And so even though it may seem a bit counterintuitive to focus on your uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, it's actually helpful to at least put them into words so that you have an awareness of it, because that gives you the power or the agency to actually do something about it. So you might, when you're thinking about this process, you might think about the following, and I believe this PowerPoint is going to be shared with folks, but so naming is taming it. So you might think about, what is my narrative about this process? What do I need to become aware of in addition to the steps I need to take to reapply? So you might think, my expectations of this process were, what were they? What might other people's expectations have been for you about this process, whether it be family members, whether it be mentors, etc.? What was the hardest part about how this actually played out, right? So you might have narratives that are more catastrophizing in nature, that are more emotional reasoning, that are just more negative, right? And these kinds of narratives can weigh you down. I might never get into the school I want, and therefore I won't be successful, might be a catastrophizing thought that you have. An example of emotional reasoning is, I feel like a failure, and therefore I am a failure. You might feel some shame, you might feel as though you left your family down, etc. So even though these are negative, uncomfortable feelings and narratives, it's important that you become aware if you're having these kinds of thoughts and feelings. How has this process made me feel? What are some of the helpful ways that I'm responding perhaps to my disappointment about this process, or that I'm responding to the uncertainty? Am I seeking advice? Am I going to presentations like this one, which you are? Am I modifying my application? Am I strategically planning? So those might be some helpful ways, but also thinking about, well, are there any unhelpful ways that I may be responding to my disappointment? Because even though we might feel the need to suppress our feelings that are uncomfortable, oftentimes they show up in various ways. They may show up in the form of procrastination, avoidance. They may show up in the form of not asking for help, etc. So part of the response to the narrative that you may have about this process, especially if you become aware that the narratives that you're holding or the emotions that you're holding are uncomfortable or negative in many ways, you might think about a self-compassion reset, right? So taking a stance in how you're engaging in this process that includes self-compassion. So what does that mean? Number one, taking a non-judgmental stance of awareness. So being mindful of how you're feeling and what you're thinking, as we just said. Connecting to your goals and your values. So you're not the only one, right, to navigate something difficult like this. So reminding yourself of your ultimate goal in this situation, what's important to you and why. And perhaps it may be helpful to think about, for example, not only wanting to become a physician or getting into medical school, but what is your why? What's even the larger why that may fuel your motivation when it comes to that? You want to practice accurate encouragement, right? So this kind of process, the reapplication process, certainly can cultivate and stir a lot of inner criticism. And we all have our inner critics. But shifting from your inner critic to your inner mentor or coach can be very helpful. And just reminding yourself that in order to perform, you have to be well, right? And so if you have trouble engaging or kind of finding your inner mentor or coach, you might want to think about who was maybe a very supportive teacher in your life, mentor in your life, professor in your life, family member or friend. What might they say to you in this process? And then giving yourself productive feedback, right? So deciding what you might learn from this disappointment or challenge, how you want to respond to it differently this time, like what can I do differently? And Dr. Taborn had lots of recommendations for how you might modify your application, edit your application, and what you want to do differently moving forward. So it's this balance of acknowledging that you might be having some uncomfortable feelings, you may feel disappointed, etc., but also using self-compassion to help fuel your moving forward with your values and your goals. And Dr. Stoddart, she's a psychologist that writes a lot about imposter fears and your inner critic, which I know can be a big part of this process. But she talks about the idea of not only shifting our thought process, but really reconnecting or connecting and leaning into our values to deal with challenges and disappointments. So in order to set meaningful goals for what you want to achieve, both personally and professionally, it's how we want to proceed within the challenging or disappointing situation. And it's helpful first to know who we are and what we want to be, or who we want to be in this process. So one way of exploring your values could be thinking about who you want to be in a certain number of years, who you want to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. This is very different than what you want to do, right? So the goal is getting into medical school. The goal is becoming a physician, right? But what is your through line? Who are you no matter what? Who are you when you will be a physician? That may be the same, that is likely the same as who you are now, right? And so thinking about that being kind of your lighthouse in this situation. So again, you might think about what kinds of value words, right? Like compassionate, service-oriented, dedicated, curious, tenacious, having grit, right? Not necessarily nouns or titles like doctor, PI, med student. So these are the values that inform the way you interact with yourself and the world around you during this difficult time, right? It will be sort of like your guide, your lighthouse, so to speak. And then thinking about what specific behaviors reflect your values. So this is a way of getting perhaps unhooked from the inner critic that may be weighing you down, especially if that inner critic, as you may become aware, is causing you to procrastinate or avoid or not ask for help. It's a shifting mindset to, but what do I actually value, and what would actually fuel that value? What gives life to that value? So we all know, as I was saying earlier, that there are narratives that we tell ourselves that may contribute to us feeling stuck and contribute to us feeling disappointed in this process and feeling burdened. And while this is not an exhaustive list of cognitive distortions or thinking errors, these are just some categories that may come up for you in the process, right? So all or nothing thinking. Meaning our performance or the outcome or situation is either perfect or it's a complete failure, 0 or no, 0 or 100, good or bad, nothing in between. Catastrophizing, so exaggerating the implications of a setback or mistake and imagining the worst will happen. So perhaps not getting into medical school the previous cycle, that the catastrophizing would be, I'm going to never get into graduate school, versus I have opportunity to try again, I'm going to try again, and I have a lot of good feedback and insight that can improve my application going forward. Mm-hmm. Mind reading, so we make assumptions about what someone else may be thinking of us. Fortune telling, we predict the outcome of an event before it happens, and typically the fortune telling is negative. Discounting the positive. So this might be something that people tend to do when they are applying to med school. You might find yourself focusing so much on the parts of your history or academic history or applications that may kind of be more sort of growth edge in nature or may need work, as opposed to counting all of the positives, counting all of your merit, etc. Overgeneralizing, taking one negative event and seeing other similar events through that lens. Maximizing or minimizing. So the importance of an event is maximized or minimized. Oftentimes this is the common root of imposter fears, where you're thinking of yourself in terms of 0 or 100, not kind of in betweens and nuances. And then emotional reasoning. The way I feel will be the fact, right? So I feel fearful about what the outcome will be, and therefore the outcome will be the worst, etc. So just kind of becoming aware, as I said earlier, of how you might be thinking or what your narrative might be as you engage in this process. And once you've sort of captured some of the more unhelpful narratives or narratives that are not as useful to you in this process, you might then think about, well, how might you challenge them? How might you respond to them such that they don't kind of become these internalized facts for you? So developing insight, right? So thinking about, how do I commonly think about this? And when do I typically fall into these thinking patterns, right? What are my triggers, so to speak? You know, the reapplication process in and of itself could be a trigger, but are there particular parts of the process that are more triggering for me than others? You are a scientist, so using your science mind, right? Using your analytical mind to dissect the scenario, right? There's usually a stimulus, that usually leads to the cognitive distortions or thinking errors, and then that may lead to some consequences that are not so helpful, not so useful when it comes to actually fueling your goals. And then you can challenge these thinking errors, right? These thinking errors are not facts. They're your inner critic, they're your mind kind of getting really involved or really kind of being triggered, right, by this anxiety provoking process, but you don't have to take them on as facts. So you can challenge them, right? You can challenge them with various hypotheses and questions. Is this true? Is this helpful? What are the consequences? How would I advise a friend? Oftentimes we tell our friends we're more supportive and more kind and more understanding to our friends than we are to ourselves. And then it's important to catch these thinking errors in real time. So regularly noting and intervening on distortions by replacing them with more rational, compassionate, nuanced thoughts. You might pause and check in, right? So in addition to the narratives and the thoughts that likely are coming up associated with this process, I'm sure there are feelings coming up. How am I feeling, right? Be specific and catch yourself when you're judging yourself, when you're judging your feelings. Oftentimes, even if feelings are uncomfortable, to judge them and to feel like we shouldn't be feeling a certain way oftentimes can make them worse, as opposed to being curious and compassionate in response to the feelings. And then take a moment to downregulate, right? Acknowledge that this is an anxiety-provoking process with a lot of uncertainty. And so it makes sense that your nervous system is going to be engaged, right? Your nervous system is going to be keyed up. And you might feel uncomfortable feelings pretty intensely. And so it's okay to honor that by saying, okay, I'm going to actually do what I can to ground myself, anchor myself, calm my nervous system. There are lots of ways to do that. I really like breathing, deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, square breathing. There are all kinds of breathing techniques that you can find online, but I find breathing is a good go-to. It's easy to sort of downregulate your nervous system. What do I need to do in this moment to feel grounded and connected is another question to my values, right? So as we said before, instead of the distortions or thinking errors or uncomfortable feelings being in the driver's seat of your goal pursuit, shifting your thoughts to what do I actually value? What's my why in this? What do I value? How do I want to engage in this process? And then gaining insight into this will empower you later. So in the interest of time, I'm going to speed up a little bit, but something else that could be helpful is thinking about this as a growth mindset. I'm sure you've had moments, certainly over the course of your college years, et cetera, where things were challenging, but you rose to the challenge. And this can be another opportunity to do the same thing. You have it in you. So thinking about this time as I'm growing, I'm becoming resilient, I'm facing my challenges, as opposed to feeling stuck in the disappointment. It's always helpful to think about especially when you're in a sort of an experience of uncertainty or a time of uncertainty, something feels very challenging and it's causing anxiety or fear or worry. It's very helpful to think about, well, let me focus on what's in my control. And sometimes even obviously kind of organizing what's in your control versus what's not in your control can be very helpful. And then know what it will take, right? So once you've sort of determined how you're feeling about this, what your narratives are, once you've sort of maybe used some techniques to calm your nervous system, maybe use some alternate ways of thinking about this, you then want to think about, well, how will I actually sort of fuel my goal, given that I know it's hard, right? And so using SMART goals is really helpful. So being specific, SMART goals are measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, they're time bound. And I'm sure you can apply this to any of the steps that Dr. Taborn talked about previously.
That's right.
You want to plan for how it will get done. So even in the midst of maybe feeling anxious about it, perhaps one thing you can do if you are feeling like, oh, it's really hard for me to get motivated to write this essay, or hard for me to get motivated to study for the MCAT or retake the MCAT, why don't you sit down and just plan for yourself how you're going to get it done? And you may surprise yourself that you're actually investing in the goal, and you may feel more motivated than you did if you were to just say, I'm not going to engage in any of this because it's too anxiety provoking, so let me sort of do something else. And then when all feels out of control, you can always go back to the basics that are going to fuel your goal anyway, right? So you need sleep and rest. You need to stay connected to people that you feel supported by. You need to think about why does this matter to me in the first place? What is meaningful to me about becoming a physician? You need to move your body. That can really help with mood management. You need to eat well. And you need to think about how to manage your stress in this process that's naturally stressful. These are some other ways to think about getting it done, even when you don't want to, even when you don't feel motivated to do so. So habit stacking, if-then planning, pleasure bundling, right? So I'm a big proponent of rewarding yourself at every step of the way, no matter how small. Creating accountability, right? Thinking about maybe someone who maybe, it could be someone also applying to med school. It could be someone who's also in the midst of achieving another goal, but you all are sort of together, keeping each other on task. And then routinizing the behavior, right? So schedule specific tasks and goals in your day. I think working 9 to 5 for the most part can make it more difficult sometimes to focus on some of the med school application goals. So it's important to be realistic about what you can accomplish perhaps in a day. You might think about it instead of just saying, when I go home after work, I'm going to write this essay. That might not be as helpful as I'm going to focus on it for an hour, because it's the evening. And then I'm going to take care of myself, right? I might eat a good dinner. I'm going to make sure I get rest. And that might actually be more productive than stating, I'm just going to work on this after work. You might find that that doesn't really get you anywhere, or kind of get you to where you want to be in terms of your goal. There are other resources at OITE. This is the website to go to for other videos, blogs, and other career development resources. Obviously, the career and educational advisors are here for you, as well as the well-being advisors. So if you want to hear more about this, or you want to talk about your particular issue, you're welcome to sign up for one-on-one well-being advising. You can reach out to the wellness email and just request an appointment. There's some upcoming well-being skills groups that I think that sort of deal with some of the things that we've been talking about, and some of the things that this process may bring up for you. Dealing with disappointment, stress resilience, perfectionism support group, all coming up in April. You'll receive an announcement and a place to register for these groups probably this week. And then also there's always Thriving Thursdays. So those are noon to 1 every Thursday. And here are the topics for April. So how to navigate difficult decisions purposefully, balancing the need for both accountability and support, from myth to momentum, debunking motivation myths and practical strategies to boost motivation in yourself and others to achieve goals. And then the performance paradox, why diversifying identity beyond just work improves professional performance, all of which could be useful, especially in the process of reapplying to med school. So thanks for your time. Let me know if you have any questions, or you might have more questions for Dr. Taborn.
Oh, that's wonderful. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm true. So as we did in the beginning of the workshop, as you're getting ready to think of your questions, I also want to give my colleague, Dr. Erica Shirley, a round of applause in your minds and publicly for sharing with us. These are kind of like, you're kind of learning the body, soul, mind, spirit, and also the practical how to apply all in one. And that's what really makes a strong applicant the next time through. So thank you very much. Do you have any questions for either or both of us? We have a couple minutes.
I'm gonna make it to where you can unmute yourself if you have a question.
Okay.
And then Dr. Hill put in the chat the workshop we're doing on the working activity section, the AMCAS and ACOMAS application next week. But if you do have questions, you should be able to unmute yourself, or you could put them in the chat, or you in the chat, or you put them in the Q&A. So we'll stay on for a few minutes because I think we are a little bit over time.
Any questions you all have? I know you've done a lot today. I guess while you're thinking about your questions, I also want to again give you all, if you all are in the room, I have you all give yourselves a round of applause and let us send that your direction for coming to the workshop, thinking about this in its entirety in preparation to consider reapplying, or if you're in the process right now. You know, doing it is one thing, but doing it well and doing it from your heart and spirit will really help your application process. We know it's difficult, but we're here to support you all the way through. Thanks for coming. Well, I don't know if we have any more today, Brittany. It might be we want to wrap for today. And then, of course, you can reach out to us at any time. Come in to meet with us, look over your applications, work with us on your well-being, on anything you want to work on in there, because it kind of can raise some of those issues as you go. Also, think about that for some of your colleagues that might be going through something like this too. That we're at colleagues here at OITE or here at NIH, we can work with you. Thanks for coming today, everybody.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon. This can be done. Thank you.